welcome to another episode of The Next 100, the podcast where we focus on the emerging industries and sectors that have the potential to do $100 million in annual recurring revenue within the next 10 years. So today, my name is Folarin Bitiri as always, and I have my able partner in crime, OJ Molame. And today we're going to be talking to two very, very interesting people that are deep guys in what they do. I don't want to spoil it. You know what we do here. So they're going to introduce themselves because I don't want to talk too much. So, Mr. Seyi, do you want to introduce yourself to the people?
Hi guys. My name is Oluseye Johnson. I lead partnerships for a new startup called Bundle. But beyond that, I've been for the last decade been involved with ecosystem development across Africa, across deep technology, across the creative sector. So quite a wide area of interest for me. Yeah.
Fantastic. He's a deep guy. So also we have my good friend Seyi as well. Seyi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, everybody. My name is Seyi Oguntunde. I'm co-founder CEO for Swap. Swap is a EV as a service mobility company where we provide first and last mile vehicles infrastructure to be able to convert from fossil fuel to electric vehicles. I've had about 10 years in the renewable energy space. I'm a second-time founder. So, my first startup was also in renewable energy. I caught the startup bug right out of school, and I've always been doing that since then.
Fantastic. So, technology. The conversation today is going to revolve a lot around that. So, we know that there are different facets to technology. There are different ways you can slice and dice. And to be honest, when we're coming up with this, the scripts for this episode, it was quite difficult to exactly frame it, into one bucket because there's so many different things. And so what I would want us to do is just on a high level, how can we get what are the emerging things within that technology space, that you guys are working on and you guys know about that you believe have that potential for 100 million ARR, and how can we get there, say in the next 10 years, especially as it pertains to understanding what the market size is today, understanding what the challenges are today, and then knowing what infrastructure, what institutions, what government policy or government intervention is required.
So I think, over the last, say 10, 15 years, right, we've seen this, huge acceleration, right, of, the use of technology and the contribution of digital type plays to GDP, right? I think in 2023, it was fintech as well as communications, right, contributed about 16.2%, right, to GDP, and in Nigeria, yes, and it's increased, right, going forward. I think obviously, oil and gas is still sort of something that's super important, right? But in terms of, the rate of growth, right, you're really seeing the growth in those two areas, right? You're seeing telecoms, you're seeing fintech, and there's a reason for that, right? Because of these are basic, human needs, right? Especially for Africans, right? We're very much about communication. That's a basic layer for business, for family, for society. And then obviously our financial sector as well. And why I mentioned this, right, is because the key to scaling upwards towards, that, $100 million, AR, is it's really about product market fit, right? It's really about going after core problems that are, intrinsic to, to our own people, right? 200 million people, right? And that's those are the people that we've counted, right? It really has to be about that. And I think what we're seeing now, I think you mentioned where are the bright spots, right? I think what we're seeing now is people starting to figure out that you can build technology into core industries, from fintech. I still think fintech is still just at the beginning stages, right? There's a whole there's a whole part of that, long tail that has not been explored, right? Everyone's obviously remittance and payments and, it's the lower hanging fruit, and there's more that's a bit harder to do, right? But there's a lot more there. We can unpack that. But then when you get to agri-tech, right? You see like in Europe, right, where most of the farmers in Italy, right, you utilize precision agriculture, right? So you're using soil sensors, you're utilizing drones, so that you're not spending more than you need to on fertilizer, which is insanely expensive, right? And then you look at how the yield and the output from our own agricultural sector, right, being super poor, right? And the reason for that is because a lot of the inputs are just out of the reach of farmers, right? So instead of me farming and putting some fertilizer, I'd rather just say, go to do it kind of thing, right? And obviously, the results are there. But when you now start utilizing technology in new ways where people say, you know what, I can help you. You might be illiterate. You might be somebody who doesn't understand technology, right? But I've built a solution that takes that into cognizance. So that hence that product market fit, right? I'm not looking for the farmer to be the one that pays me, but I'm looking innovatively at who across the value chain can actually pay that, right? So whether it's the Nestles or the outgrowers, right, who want better output, better inputs, right, into their products, or say like the Dangote, tomato processing plant, right? That's growing. There's rice processors and things like that, right? All of these people need better inputs. A lot of this is imported, right? Currently, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So there's that potential to take from that, right, and do it locally, utilizing technology, and really grow to that 100 million. I mean, there's more, but I think looking at agriculture, manufacturing, health, right, core problems, and then underline that with technology, right? I'm pretty much a deep tech type person, so AI and space, but not about those things as buzzwords, right? I don't need to know it's using space technology, right, to do that precision agriculture. But the end user is saying, wow, I don't know what you did, but my yield is 30% more this year, right? Which, startups like Rural Farmers Hub, right, have been doing this for a long time, utilizing, remote sensing and space data to help farmers, right? Couple of years, they've increased, yield 30, 40%, right? Utilizing these techniques. Obviously, you go on the ground as well. You're not just using space technology, right, in a vacuum. You're going there, talking to farmers, getting them to do good agricultural practices and all of that, right? But that's what happens when you marry technology with things that, with real life practical things on the ground in those industries as well. And you can scale that across anything else, from manufacturing to health and all of that.
I think that's very powerful because one of the reasons why we started this podcast is to drive consensus. I mean, like I always say, we probably won't get general consensus. Everyone won't agree.
I love it.
I think we should be able to get enough people to agree on the way forward. And for example, using technology to kind of substitute imports. Because I think one of our main focus really right now for this podcast is for import substitution and export. So I think when it comes to technology, it needs to be substituting some level of imports, and it needs to be exported as well. Because there are quite a number of people, a number of countries that have similar contexts to ours.
Yes.
Which technology that you build for Nigeria will probably work there. But when you are importing cars in Nigeria, we're importing cars that are made for European or American weather conditions or climate conditions, and then we expect them to operate with the same level of efficiency, which is crazy to me. But so this is why I think it's also interesting that we have Seyi in the room, because Seyi is doing exactly this.
And like what Seyi was saying, right, what was really striking for me is a lot of the technological infrastructure that we need to build are things that we need to hardware our way through. Yeah. We can software our way through these problems. Yeah. And I think...
Cannot bank the unbanked here.
and I think a lot of I think over the past 10 years, most of the startups that have been popping up have been trying to build a lot of software infrastructure. Yeah, they've given a bit of leeway forward, right? But it just has a roof that you can get to, you can get us to, because at the end of the day, most of our problems are hardware problems.
Yeah.
And until we begin to have a lot more people that are focused about hardware innovation, and it's not very sexy because not a lot of investors have patient capital.
It's hard.
And so you see that is highly discouraging. It takes a lot of passion to do what we do. Like, we can literally count how many guys are hardware innovators in the country right now, because we literally know ourselves because, nobody wants to really give you that patient capital. And for us to be decisive about the level of infrastructure we need to build, it has to be a combination of both government and the private sector, where they are saying, okay, yes, we know we need this infrastructure. We're not looking at the immediate gains we're going to get. We're ready to give you a 10, 20-year runway to be able to put this thing out and get it working. And I think that is where we are now. I think that's the pivotal point that we are now. And for things to move forward, like the way you said, for example, the agribusiness, one of the startup idea I had before I started Swap was where we designed a containerized solar refrigerator,
like
cold
storage.
like a cold, and then we can move it.
That's a cold hub.
Cold hub, yes,
Yes.
I know cold hub.
So we were thinking about it
There's also
from
a guy
a
in
40
Kenya.
feet.
There's also a guy in Kenya.
So a few people are doing, but this is an idea I had like 6-7 years ago. And this was way before everybody was thinking about it this way. And again, we wanted to bootstrap it. Money finished. and then you're back to the drawing board, because and it's really interesting, because I think one of the reasons why this is a big problem is because there's no infrastructure for research and development in the country.
I love it.
That is not available.
There is.
Like, for people like us, we started building our first for Swap, for example. 2019, we started the journey. Okay, so Swap is, like I said, EV as a service business, where we convert already existing vehicles from fossil fuel to EVs. We figured out that in order to usher in electric vehicles into the country, you can't just import it in. You need to figure out how to get people that are not used to this kind of technology to be able to have a sense of how it works, and then, onboard them into the EV ecosystem. And so we thought the best way to do that is convert the already existing vehicles. A lot of people already have an understanding of what their vehicles look like. And, just changing a few things for them is not a very strong behavioral change for them. And so that way they can switch mentally from, fossil fuel to EV, because in their mind, it doesn't matter whether it's water or hydrogen or battery, as long as my car is moving.
From A to B.
And so that's how we thought about the solution, and that's how we started building. And so we started with the first and last mile vehicles. That's your Keke Maras and your Korope buses. We've been able to convert that. So we literally convert them in about 2 hours. They come into our workshop. 2 hours after, they're back on the road, already converted. And it has been an interesting story.
I don't understand. So a regular keke
Yes.
would come into your shop
Yes.
and you do a conversion to EV in 2 hours.
Yes.
How?
We completely removed their combustion engine. We designed our conversion kit in such a way that, quickly plug it into it, and then you're back outside.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so this took like almost 4 years of different iteration. And so that's what I was talking about, the R&D process. In 2019, when we started, we had enough money to just buy some things. And they were very careful not to blow it up. And then when it blows up, it takes another 6 months before we can do it again, because we need to go and work and gather money and then rebuy it again. And so, this is something that we could have finished in 2 years and properly been able to launch this product, and would have been way ahead where we are now. The EV revolution in East Africa is way ahead of where we are in Nigeria. And so these are part of things that causes a lot of these problems.
I was gonna piggyback off what you said about R&D, right? Being like it's sort of like an engine, right, for all of this kind of innovation to happen.
Yeah.
Right. If you and that's where governments come in, right? You
Yes.
don't see any country that is ahead, right, without the government being intentional. Right, from a policy perspective, from a funding perspective, right? So you have, like, Israel has the Innovation Fund, right? And part of that is towards hardware. You have the US, putting, I think, 3.2% of GDP back into R&D, 3.2%, right? China, I think, increased to 2 point something,
Yes.
right? I think Nigeria is supposed to be about 0.2%, which is still not bad, but I mean, I need to see where it's going.
I don't think
right?
funding is getting there. And I think even after that, there's no incentive for the students to, because again, at the end of the day, you're going to be cutting wire and chopping cable. And that's not very, very interesting. So that orientation is not there.
Yeah.
And it's not very sexy when you come out also, because it takes you a long time. It takes you almost 5 to 10 years to know whether your product as a hardware is actually going to survive. And nobody is that patient. So there has to be an entire ecosystem that encourages
patient
this,
capital,
that allows this to become very interesting for people.
Yeah.
And they can survive also through it.
So that's also something with the space industry, right? So you see, like Elon Musk now, everybody knows about
so
space. Sorry.
Can you explain what's happening in the space industry in Nigeria? Because for a lot of people, maybe they don't know that there's a space industry in Nigeria.
So space meaning out of...
This is outer space.
Out of the
Out
Earth.
of
Yes,
space.
out of the space. Yeah.
So what's the space industry in Nigeria like?
Okay. So, I mean, just backtracking a little bit, right? The reason why we look at things like, space technology is because, for me, right, no economy can grow without focusing on R&D, right? And focusing on new technologies that everybody else hasn't quite figured out what the killer applications for those things are. Right. So that's why obviously you have China, you have the US, like literally vying over who's going to, win this, AI. And then also I think Biden has just passed a law before he gets out that literally will stop anybody getting certain kinds of chips, right, from NVIDIA, which NVIDIA is like trying to, roll back, right? Obviously, he's going to lose them some money. But that's because of their R&D. That's because of how they've pushed that with the universities, with, grants and things like that. And then so when you think about that, right, you then say, okay, what are the technologies and where are the areas that people are trying to, build out new economic growth opportunities? And space is one of the biggest ones, right? It affects everything, right? Obviously, satellite communication is a big one, right? So if you want to think about space, you think about it as going out into space. So that's, space exploration. That's going to the moon, going to the stars, going to Mars, right? And then the other way of looking at it is turning back to the Earth and saying, what value can we get with the vantage point of being this high and looking back at our Earth, right? What can we tell about society, about locations, and it's immense, right?
Sorry to interrupt. So why? So Nigeria has 100 million people like living in multi-dimensional poverty. So why should we care about space?
Okay, so
as opposed to transportation and feeding and financial services and energy and just not being poor.
Okay.
I'm just curious.
It's
just like in case any audience member is
No, that's so I guess that's where I was going with backtracking and then coming back to what we're currently doing in space, right? So I mean, many countries have ended up solving problems that they didn't intend to solve, right, by doing hard things, right? Things that didn't seem like the lowest hanging things to solve, right? So you find that space has solved societal level, problems. So in this room, there's probably a smoke detector. There's certain software that we use. There's mobile communications, baby food, even freeze drying fruits and things like that. All of these things came from that hard endeavor of trying to do things in space, right? So what happens when Africa owns that process as well? What then? You'll find that we start solving institutional challenges that we've had for last 50. We've had power problems for the last since this country was a country, right? We've had you see old newspapers that read as if they were just last week, right? We've had problems with agriculture. We've had problems with, but having that vantage point of space, right, gives you when they talk about air supremacy, like the higher you go, right, the more you can tell, right? So utilizing that for agriculture, using that for migration, using that across many different kinds of problems, right? It just opens up a whole level of innovation that invariably then leads to economic growth and value, right? That then builds out new opportunities for people. So if you're thinking of helping just one or two people, right, it's lower, you go lower down. But if you want to help at a societal level, right, you go much higher, right? And so currently, you have the Nigerian Space Agency, right, NASDRA, which is, it's got a couple of satellites up. I think we haven't utilized them as much as we should. But then you also have NIGCOMSAT, right? And they're the satellite communications company, right? We just did the first space accelerator, right, with NIGCOMSAT under Jane, who's the new I guess MD, right? And it's been amazing because we had about 20 different startups. Some were space leveraging, which is companies that are using space to do stuff around, healthcare or, education. I mean, using space for those things. How do you do that, right? And then you had others that were, leveraging space data for climate change or agriculture, right? And some of these guys are doing really, really well. And these are local Nigerian companies that are innovating and having real economic, impact, across Africa.
So let me ask, because I think it's very important that we drive this point home.
Okay.
That the space technology that we're talking about here is not just space for the sake of space.
No.
Like there is real on the ground impact. So you mentioned earlier that there was a company that's in space tech that's delivering some form of precision agriculture. So how does that work? What is the impact? And basically, how does it impact the yields, for example? Or how does it impact the cost of whatever for a farmer? And what is required for that sort of innovation to scale?
Okay, so some of these have a hardware component, as you had mentioned, and some are more of software, right? So we don't have we don't have satellites that are necessarily giving us satellite data, right? Of our own. We have to leverage, satellite data from, say, Europe or from other, private companies.
So the dollar conversation.
So the dollar conversation then comes in, and it's part of what we're trying to solve, right? In terms of how do we get, subsidized or cheaper data so that it can be passed on further down the value chain in a way that's, scalable. But then, you have companies like, as I said, Rural Farmers Hub or Agro Exchange. These are companies that are, doing things like, mapping out, commodities, right? So you can say that because with satellite technology, you can tell how much yield, right, somebody's going to have way before it actually comes out of the ground. So, one of the things that has been innovative is farmers might not have access to credit. Right, usually. But then if I can tell you, right, categorically that this is how much yield I'm going to have, right, in 1 or 2 months, right, then I can actually go take that to the bank and actually say, here is evidence. I need to borrow, right, towards this to do X, Y, Z. So that's something that would not have been possible, right, for those farmers before that. And so it then means that they're able to get, say, access to certain kinds of tools, certain kind of inputs, certain, tractors or things to do harvest with, all of those kind of things that generally mean that the harvest is much better and they make more money, right? And as I said, some of these guys have seen 30%, 40%, increase in yield, right? Now to scale this, right, I think that, obviously there's a data aspect that we have to look at, but I think policy as well, right? Because it's difficult to do business in Nigeria as a whole.
Yeah.
Whatever business you're doing, even if it's a fintech, right? Which is the nicer, everyone's supporting that. So it's even harder to be a space tech company, right? I mean, the life expectancy of that is probably 2 years, and so if you can have grants, if you can have, funds that are specifically focusing on these areas because the government just wants to lead in that area because they see that this potentially is where economic growth can come from. Because generally governments can take that kind of, they can give that kind of support just because they want to lead in that area, even way before it looks like it's a thing. Just like America would say, okay, we want to lead in quantum computing. We don't know if it's going to be a thing, but we know it's pretty important, right? It hasn't yet made any money, but we're going to put our backing behind it. So we need that kind of forward thinking. We also need knowledge, right? Enough people who, you can count on the back of your hand how many space startups there are, right? So the more we're empowering people, you have the 3MTT program with, the minister, right? That has, I think about maybe, okay, don't quote me on this, but maybe about 13 to 15 different areas that they focused on, right? And it was quite wide, right? I don't think hardware was in there, right? So we need to be, maybe the next phase of that needs to include a bit more, things that can help with hardware, with deep tech type, and that can really infuse into universities, because that's where typically you would see some of the people who already have some of that skill set.
So just to interject, I think that conversation was being broached by the Minister of Science and Technology. So I think the way the ministries are set up is also a bit confusing. But
it's different.
I mean,
so you have the Ministry of Science and Technology, who is meant to support all the research and all of that stuff, and then the Ministry of Digital Economy is very much infrastructure focused.
Yes.
So if you look at the MJs under it, you have NCC.
Yes,
so
you have
the major
NIGECOMSAT.
thing of NCC is regulating the telcos and also driving the broadband agenda. So the broadband plan of the country is designed by NCC, driven by NCC. That's their job.
So let me explain what I mean.
But then
by
you have a capacity component in there, capacity building component, right?
Okay.
So there's the research and development,
Yeah,
right? But you've also
exactly.
you've got to bridge that gap between research and then commercialization,
Exactly.
right? And that's the biggest.
exactly.
It's called the valley of death,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
In space tech, but I think in general, right?
general,
Where
yeah.
you're trying to take technology that has matured in the research arena and then
And get-
commercialize. I think it's like maybe a 70% death rate,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it's super key, because if you look at, say, Silicon Valley, you have, Stanford, you have, Caltech, and then you have the companies, right? And you have the capacity to be able to take, to bridge that. In Europe, they built something called the BICs, so Business Incubation Centers. So what they did was they went to top universities. You have all the research chops, and then went to startups and said, you have all the capacity, right, and understanding of how to change these things. And they just said, come into the
Bridges.
same space. And it's been super, super successful.
Productive, yeah.
Right.
So,
yeah.
sorry, let me just interject. So the reason why I said there's that overlap, or there seems to be that overlap, is because in Nigeria today, we have a lot of science and technology colleges, technical colleges. They are all over the country, pretty much in every local government. Or every 2 local governments. So like, if it's not your local government, it's probably in the next one right beside you. And it's everywhere. And the focus for them, like under Buhari, there was a welding program that a lot of money went into to train people how to be welders, because the organized oil and gas industry said they need welders. So I think we have the bones for a lot of these things that we're talking about. But I think we've not decided, we don't have a concise agenda. We don't have consensus on how exactly it should be delivered, who does what, and what jobs are to be done. Let me explain why I say this. I say this because I have a brother-in-law who is in real estate. He's a real estate developer, and he has to hire a lot of carpenters and a lot of these kinds of folks, artisans. So because of the churn rate, like he's literally having to hire like every other month. Because if you ask anybody that is building anything hardware in Nigeria, that churn rate is crazy. So I think, or maybe I should ask, from your perspective at Swap, and share from your own perspective as well with space tech, like what is required for talent development for this $100 million dream that we're trying to build?
I'll think it start from a technical know-how first, Because when you, for example, the artisans you're talking about, you talk to an electrician that wants to come and wire your house and he doesn't even understand how to look at the wire coding. And so sometimes when I go to people's houses and I'm like, your house is like a bundle of fire about to happen. Because I just take one look at your DB, I'm like, oh my God, who did this? And and these guys, they are working on very ancient knowledge and is passed across and diluted that way. There's no actual framework on how to certify these guys, how to make sure that the blue workers are actually getting a program that allows them to understand what they're doing, how they're supposed to do it, and how to modernize that entire process. And so I think that's one very key area that is lacking. Even with SWAP, the welders that we're working with and the mechanics, we literally have to take them back to school because
Literally, I think about school.
like literally when I say that, like literally start training them again from the scratch. Because I'm telling you, I caught something for me in 1 meter, like 1 meter how she inches in here be foot. I'm like, and so they don't even understand the SI unit enough to be able to get what you're trying to say. I sketch a diagram for them and I'm saying, okay, so let me replicate this. You literally have to sit down with them again to tell them you're cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting. So they know how to hold the cutting machine or the welding machine and they know how to weld it, but they don't know how to innovate around that entire process. And so that is something that is very lacking because there's no technical base to how they learn this thing. And most people that go and learn it in the university don't find it sexy enough to come and work outside the way they're supposed to do it. And even the people that learn in university, they just learn for learning's sake. There's no practical, coming out of university, you won't do your final year project, giving it out somebody to help you to do. These are the gaps that, at the end of the day, they come together and then form a total mess when you come outside into the public. And I think that's something that is fundamentally lacking in the hardware space. You want to say something?
No. I was going to say that, just adding to that, right, in terms of, because you're asking about how do we build that capacity, right?
Yes.
I think Nigerians were also very much self-starters, right? We're very curious, which is why we go into any economy, Ghana, Nigeria, and then South Africa, and then we're being shooed back out, like go back to your place, you're taking over everything, right? So 2014, right, I reached out to NASA and said, hey, we have this growing tech ecosystem, right?
Explain what NASA is.
Okay,
For them.
so NASA is the space agency for the US, right? It's in every Hollywood movie somewhere,
That's what
right?
you just said it so. NASA.
The guy's always saving everybody. NASA's always saving the rest of the world,
every
right?
time.
So basically, we reached out and said, okay, you have this thing called the NASA Space Apps Challenge, right? Which many different countries are, participating, but Nigeria has never done one. So I reached out and said, look, let's bring it. We don't have that many space startups or even universities who have space courses and things like that. But we have people in tech and there's adjacent capabilities, capacities. So whether you're in GIS from oil and gas or you're doing hardware or something else, right? And so we held the first one in 2014 with the Minister of Communications what's her name? Omobola Johnson at the time. So she said, look, do it in 2 cities, start bigger. So we did Calabar and Lagos. And then from there it grew to 7 startups over the next couple of years. And then in the end, it organically grew to about 14 cities. And each one had a university component, a startup ecosystem component. And those people were coming together just because I'm interested in space. I've never done it. I don't understand it, but I'll come and hack and create, solutions, right? Because you're saying that I can be part of it, right? I'm already curious. And out of that, right, we've seen, companies that have tried to then go on to build hardware, right? I don't know if you know, I think they're called HALs, which is like balloons that you keep in the atmosphere and they can, do certain things like monitor the atmosphere or look back down at us, right? So for oil and gas vandalism, which is a huge thing, right? Someone was building something out of the, our program. You have people who've gone on to work for Microsoft who said, literally, I started learning and building capacity in this particular software development area after jumping into one of the hackathons, right? So I think there's also that ability to encourage people to learn because you expose them to new things. You build communities around, hard things that are not currently in the ecosystem, and people will just pick it up and run, right? And then obviously the next thing is funding, right?
That's a really nice. But for
know?
me, I think to add to what you're saying, right, it's also different. For example, if you go to Oshodi, you see a lot of people that are doing a lot of soldering on soldering boards,
and they've innovated,
like
and
very, very intelligent guys, but they are very crude.
yeah.
And that's where the problem is. The problem is that, they just know past what they need to deliver for, and they're doing this just so that they can survive every day. These are people that if they are put into a proper manufacturing process, given the right set of training and certification, they will do excellently well. And these are talents that are wasting on a daily basis. There needs to be a policy, not just policy,
real estate.
An orientation shift.
Yes.
I think that's it.
Yes. And more of a certification system that allows you to gather all these guys, get them opportunities, expose them to people because again, at the end of the day, a lot of manufacturers need this. I can remember one time when I think in 2018 there was a particular chip that we were working with a particular manufacturing company, and they were literally importing this thing from abroad, and they were spending about $200 on a monthly basis to get this thing done. That's the firm one they had. And I said, give me $10. I said, like, give me $20. I'll do this. I'll do this at my backyard with my eyes closed. And so we're like, we can do this thing in-house. Yeah. But first, the private sector don't even know where to tap these talents from the market. There's that big gap in that. And then also the guys at the talent side also they've not gone through a structured system that allows them to know how to, engage these private sectors. And, so I think whether it's a union that has to be done, a certification that has to be done, I think that gap needs to be filled. Yeah. And so that, because it's from there that we can now start building the layers for how this infrastructure needs to work.
Okay.
I'm loving the way the conversation has gone, because this was not what I imagined. I did not imagine this.
If you want to get to 100 million,
this is what foundation is first.
But I'm loving how it started off with the government, and you say, the government has to enact policies to stimulate this, which is normal. However, I find it so interesting how it started off with R&D as opposed to investment policies. So like invest in the sector and companies or land and all of that. I'm loving that how it started with R&D and how it's gone into development of talent. And one thing I've now learned and understand and I appreciate is a conversation on vocational education. And I think it's something we need to bring back a lot in Nigeria. I remember years ago I went for something and it said if you're not academically apt, you should be vocationally apt.
Quotable.
Yeah. I think our parents, we love you. But I think some parents at times should maybe allow their kids
very,
with their hands.
very true.
So I think it's just understanding, and it's not even maybe from the parents' part, which is true. I think also like from the government's part. I love what you're saying on certifying and structuring vocational skills.
Institutionalizing.
Because for language, you have all those schools.
You have them.
Technical this, technical that, technical
You'll
this,
be surprised that there are actual certifications. Like, actually, there are different iterations of technical colleges in Nigeria.
Yeah.
So it's not just that, we built photo and the likes. We had several different people that have tried to do this vocational thing. I think the problem is that we've looked at it from a supply side mentality, that build and they would come. But a lot of those places are empty.
Yeah.
Because the people are like, why would I want to go and learn how to be a carpenter? But then they don't realize that the mechanic and the carpenter, the money they are making
is a lot.
But then the thing is, because the mechanic and the carpenter that are in there right now are not as polished as you say, or have not been able to package themselves or institutionalize what they are doing, their vocation, so that it becomes an industry. We then look down on it and think it's this thing that So, but then the thing is, this is what is required for us to get where we need to.
I think
get
so. Okay.
No. So just quickly, I was talking to someone who, I don't know if you know Philip from Innovia Labs.
Yeah, I know him.
Right, and generally there are hardware centers within certain states, within universities already.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And a lot of these places you'd go and you'd find that they're actually locked up.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
For example, where they're using now the NITEL, building that they're using in Oshodi for where Innovia Labs are using right now.
Yeah.
Is a full campus.
It's a full campus.
Campus.
There's real estate built.
I got there and I was like,
Yeah.
If the government will give us the opportunity to come here and just begin to train people, we have things like startup competitions.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
these are things that would allow
That's
the boss,
infrastructure.
like
Exactly.
and but it's not available. And I wanted to say something about what you were saying about the traditional mechanics and the rest. And this is where technology comes into it, because people like us have now come to say, okay, there are better ways. I can remember my first startup when we're building a few things, and we didn't have money to buy as little as an oscilloscope. I literally needed to build an oscilloscope to be able to test what we needed the oscilloscope to test. Just imagine, because you know at that time we're bootstrapping and it was really struggling. You know? And so these are technology that we understood that we needed to know. But if you give an electrician an oscilloscope now to use to read a board or to try and check frequency, it cannot begin to tell you how to use it. But from his head, he knows that if it sounds like this or it moves like this, trial by error. And so with this kind of structure I'm talking about, you can usher in very updated technologies to these guys that makes them a lot more efficient. And so you bring in your cars, they can tell what's wrong with your car from technology, not by the sound of your engine. And so these are things that are really lacking in the space right now. And some of these tools are not cheap. And again, like I said, this is where R&D plays a good part. I think my co-founders, we did a hardware startup, a hardware hub in Alimosho, where we put in a few equipments. We're backed by IHS, and we put in a few equipment for hardware to come in and use it. And just even trying to convince people that this thing is here, come and use it, it's free of charge. This is a bigger hurdle to do also, because a lot of people have been so discouraged. So there's a need for reorientation, like you said.
Why were they discouraged? They tried the first time.
Because you've been doing this all your life, and then you couldn't get it done. And even when you try to get it done, the people you're talking to are just thinking about how to exploit you. And then at the end of the day, they give you very wishful thinking, and then at the end of the day, they just dump you on the ground. And so a lot of young people have had their hands burnt. They're not very happy with the way they've been treated. Some, they will do for example, I've had several people that will do a POC for. They take technology, take it out to China, and they replicate it and come back and do it, and then they will import it. So they will rather do that than to give it to somebody that actually built it for the scratch from them. And so these are big problems that needs to be solved in the hardware space. And if they are not solved, then, like you said, importation will continue to happen.
I mean, and the honest truth is that we cannot so I know this is about technology, but I'm reminded of GSK leaving Nigeria. So GSK left Nigeria, and the cost of inhalers went from like 1,500 naira to like, I don't know, 9,000 or something, almost overnight. And then GSK had been in Nigeria at that time 50-something years. Wow. They had been selling inhalers. And then they said, I read it online, I don't know if it's true, but they say that there are about 15 million people in Nigeria that have asthma, that need inhalers. So my question was not like, is it that we've been sleeping? Or like, I don't understand, why is it that we've just been okay importing? Why is it that, I guess my argument is because there's a thing I was talking to OJ about. So basically, we have a piece of land. What we want to do is we want to just create space for hardware people. We want them to come in, build whatever it is they want to build, and then we'll, as much as we can, as the funding permits, we would provide all the infrastructure that we can, so that they can support them in whatever it is they want to build, right?
And then as well as a route to market.
And a route to market. So the thing is, like, we want to be able to productize innovation.
I think some of those places you're looking at,
they already exist. Exactly.
The Nighthawk building that we went to, I saw CNC machines that I was, as an hardware guy, like, oh my God, I wish I saw this 3, 4, 5 years ago. The things that we would have done. And, these machines were rusting. They were not useful for anything, because even people to operate them didn't even know how to operate it. And so they are turning it into something else. And these are equipment that, you spent millions and millions of naira to buy.
Not just in one place.
And not just in one place.
All over the country.
Yeah. So we can revive some of these places. These machines are already existing in some of these places. We just need to get these guys to come here and say, okay, this is already existing. Produce a few people that will show that this works, and you will see the amount of people that are in the hardware space.
I think part of it also needs to be an incentivization, right? Because if you say something like, for any university that is, churning out hardware type innovations or whatever, you're getting this tax break or this, whatever it is that means money, right? Because then the people who generally don't see any benefit in these things, which is why they're locked up, currently, right, would then say, okay, I understand money,
Yeah.
right? So let that thing be open and let those young people go and do whatever, and then so that we can get access to this money that is now available to us.
Yes, I
Like
agree.
it needs to be incentivized, otherwise it's just going to keep rotting.
I agree with you, and again, that's where the private sector also comes in. Where
Capital.
Yes,
they can
yes.
spend some of their CSR on saying, okay,
Capital.
we can give grants to
Yeah.
people
The
that come
capital
up
is
with this kind of
important.
innovation. Even not just at the prototype stage. If you can encourage people from prototype stage, then you'll be able to get people to do a lot more. And so I think that is somewhere that is grossly lacking. Not just trying to invest as a venture capital, but a lot of grants. Like the hardware space is highly undergranted. Is the way I'll put it. And then when you're talking again, the world is like you were saying earlier on about the DEI thing. I don't want to talk too much about it so I don't get into trouble. But there's a lot of incentive for women-led startups. There's a lot of incentive for agriculture-led startup. Just be a farmer, but they're not looking at it from the hardware technology-driven point of view. There should be incentive for the fact that you're just in the hardware space. The fact that in the hardware space, there should be a form of grant that says, okay, what are you building? Even if it's not going to give us commercialization today, but what are you building? And let's encourage you. Let's see how we can encourage more people to do this kind of things. I think that is very important.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And just to say that, I know we focused a lot on hardware and R&D, right? But this is, whether it's health tech, whether it's mobility,
Exactly.
whether it's agriculture,
Yeah.
whether it's, space tech, all of these things, right, to get to that, 100 million that we're looking at, have to have some kind of homegrown, hardware
It's necessary.
components.
Yeah.
Right?
It's-
It just reduces cost. It
Yeah.
just, it increases capacity in terms of the talent, right? All of these different components are needed to actually scale.
I think hardware cuts across every one of them that you spoke
Exactly.
to.
Yeah.
With Swap, when we started building Swap and all that, the mechanics that started with us were random keke mechanics, abokis like the way you say it, right? And they were Hausa guys. And after I think they've been working with us for 2 years now, these guys will literally look at a Tesla and say, okay, yes, I think I can take a shot at it.
Sweet.
And that's because of the level of exposure we're giving to them. The community where set up a swap station, we've been able to employ 13 people in that particular community. The community is a lot better about it. The riders themselves, they are exposed to a new kind of life. The other time, Fola were talking about how we can start extending them health insurance.
Yes.
And they can pay over their battery swap. There's a level of credit that we can give them. And this is just from one hardware startup in transportation and has evolved into changing other aspects of these people's life in community. So imagine replicating that in every other community. This is how growth begins to happen and affects every other person. Now, other people that are in that particular community are coming to come and tell me, I thought about this mobility thing in this way. Now they're thinking about how they can re-innovate what we've already given them a foundation to innovate and thinking about how to make different archetypes of this kind of vehicles, looking at vehicle manufacturing. The young guys now are inspired to think this way because they saw somebody do it. It is working. They look like as if they are making money. Okay, so this is looking like a very good thing to do. And I think that is kind of things that we need to begin to push out into our space right now. The ecosystem is extremely lacking. I can remember when we were doing renewable energy. I think we were slightly ahead of our time at that point in time.
What year was this?
This was like 2016, 2015.
Yes, you are ahead of it.
We're so ahead of our time. Fuel was not the problem. Now, everybody's coming to me, I used to do solar panel. I'm like, bros. When I was doing solar, you will not talk to me now. Diesel is petrol is 1,000 naira. You're coming to talk to me. And so we're kind of ahead of our time, but the gap was so much that you have to build the entire chain
Exactly.
from building the inverter to producing it to finding finance to executing it to talking to the customers to building the application that they need to use on their phone. Like the entire
chain.
value chain needs
From
to build
scratch.
from one single startup. It cannot happen. You die before you finish one. And so that's why we died. That's why we died. And then so these are real problems that hardwares are facing. And space tech, you see, we're brothers. Space tech hardware is the same problem that we're facing because it's the same kind of ecosystem that we need to actually survive in.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I read an article once, and what both of you have said is actually very correct. The article was talking about the highest employers of labor in Nigeria and in the informal economy. So a chunk of Nigeria is informal.
Yes.
And that's basically the highest employers of labor in the country. And these are the spaces that absorb a lot of the youth. As a matter of fact, anytime I talk to someone, I say the chances of a graduate of any degree or whatever from Nigeria entering the informal economy is almost 100%. He's probably going to end up shaking his bum on TikTok because he just couldn't get a formal job. But then on that list,
That's one way to put it.
yeah, on that list, it put up 4 main sectors. It put up agriculture, which is a perpetual there. It put up the creative industries.
Yes.
And interestingly, it put up digital economy and artisans. So basically, on this conversation, we spent it on talking about artisans,
Yes.
talking about digital economy, who
Yes.
apparently like absorb a chunk of the population of Nigeria.
Yeah.
Beyond agriculture and everything. So again, if we can find a way to put a structure to that place, then you can see. I mean, who knows? Because in South Korea, one of the superstars of South Korea is Samsung.
Yeah.
And that's hardware.
Yeah.
So, and I love when you spoke about the value chain, which is because if I am producing a car, I need to produce the parts of the car. I need to produce
The
parts
material.
of the parts of
The
car.
materials
And the
first.
parts of the parts of the parts of the
Yeah,
car.
yeah.
And what ends up happening is that you build a whole economy around
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Because
Yeah.
in the end, you won't be the one
Demand
creating
is-
all 7 parts
Yeah,
of
yeah.
that. Because you are
can't.
successful,
At
Yeah.
times
then
it's 20
somebody
different
says,
parts.
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
Toyota now, like, the door handle is created by a completely different company.
Yeah.
The engine, the da-da-da,
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
And that's how Silicon Valley was also created. Silicon Valley was
exactly.
one big semiconductor company.
And then it became
because
two.
and it became
because
two. And then
some of the guys in the first one left.
the founders
Yeah,
left
yeah,
and
yeah.
created their
Smaller
own split up,
parts.
but they
Yeah,
understood
yeah.
what the big one needed.
Yeah.
So they now
Yeah.
created small
Exactly.
splinters.
Yeah,
So now,
yeah.
Yes, and that's how it's going to work. For example, look at the mobility space. Everybody wants to bring in the vehicle. Everybody wants to be the battery charger. Everybody wants to also be the charging station.
You can't.
You
can't
die.
work.
Have to have division of labor and
can't.
Yeah.
specialization.
Can't work.
But you see, in a system like this, for example, for us, I can only talk about us. We started doing vehicle conversions. Our main business is the infrastructure. We want to build the charging infrastructure across the country. But if I build a charging infrastructure and there's no vehicle to
And
charge,
there's
there's
can't
no
work.
business. So, and then I'm like, okay. And so it got us thinking, I cannot start bringing in brand new vehicles, right? And so that's where we started thinking and say, okay, let's start creating these vehicles for our charging infrastructure. The long plan is to say, okay, you know what, we built enough charging infrastructures, or we built enough vehicles to sort of support infrastructures. How do we begin to do collocations? How do we get other people that are bringing vehicles to be able to use our charging infrastructures, and then the business can start rolling out like that, and then people can start diversifying into different sectors of this market. This is how it has to happen.
I just think it's so brilliant.
Just,
I'm sorry.
so because I'm being told that we're almost out of
okay.
time.
So, summary?
But one thing I wanted to mention. So I studied aeronautical engineering in school, and when I was in school, like we had to read for quite a number of subjects. So, and these things are like engineering type things that I don't remember anymore. But then I remember you would read about this specific propulsion. And in propulsion, you say, oh, in blah, blah, blah year, and during the DARPA program, this happened. And then in this other one, you hear, oh, during this year, this happened in DARPA. So I said, what was DARPA? DARPA was a program that was run by NASA that was like a space type program. So what Seyi was saying and what you are also saying, I think what OJ was saying earlier on, like because they tried to solve a very hard problem, so they happen to solve many small problems on the way.
As byproducts.
And the interesting thing is that a lot of things you'll be very surprised in refrigeration, in things even like frying pans, like the new frying pan technology that we are using today. It literally evolved from DARPA. Like so much evolved from there. So like solar power technology and all that. So I think it's just very interesting.
I just wanted to quickly, because that's super important, right? If you have organizations or initiatives, right, that put some kind of prize or some kind of scene, because I think incentive, because I think it's like maybe $1 million if you can solve this, or $10 million, right? self-driving cars came out of the DARPA, competitions, right? Things like reusable rockets that Elon Musk is doing, right, came out of that. So you had universities, really intelligent people all come together and start, trying to do that, right? And then obviously now we have those. It's the same sort of thing. So I'm putting together, because out of space, the Space Apps Challenge, right? I found that you would have that every year, and it's like, okay, where is the continuity? So every year we start again, right? But obviously, I mean, after many years, many people have come to me and said, oh, I started doing this because of you, this, and that's good. But where is that, continuous growth, right? And so what we're doing is no longer sort of this hackathon type framework, right? But we're putting together like a 3 to 4 month type program where it's not necessarily everybody, but it's experts globally, right, that are able to come together, right, over a very hard problem, right, but localize it for Nigeria, and then we have funding from IDAs, right, who are focused on these particular areas. And I think once we do that, we'll start seeing you give you that excuse to solve problems that normally nobody will go after, and those will end up being the solutions to many things that we're trying to actually solve right now. Just like you just said, because literally you're creating the future. By focusing on something that people just think, oh, why are you doing self-driving cars? Or why are you doing reusable rockets? Or some of the things that you mentioned. And it turns out to be the future.
Yeah. I think it's very, very powerful because, I mean, when it comes to capital, though, just the last question that I want to ask, I think we need to answer. Okay, I'm being told by the producers that we're totally out of time. But I think one thing we need to speak on, or one thing we need to think about, is how DARPA can be funded from a government standpoint, and how to kind of argue the impact statement. Because, the way every budget works in everything, even in a household, you would definitely have more demand than supply of money.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to stack rank and prioritize. So in that prioritization, we need to tell better impact statements. We need to have impact statements that show ROI.
Okay.
And it needs to be real. It can't just be, let's wait 10 years and maybe. We need to find a way to go from 0 to 1, and then from 1 to 99 later on.
Okay.
But that 0 to 1, which is what Swap has done, which is what those people that came to the space hackathons and stuff that you did in like as far back as 2014 did. So we need to have 0 to 1s. And when we have 0 to 1 successes, then the 1 to 99s will sort themselves out.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're done for the day. But this has been a very, very fantastic conversation. And I just want to say thank you for joining us. And if you've enjoyed this, please like, comment, share. Tell us what you think. Technology in Nigeria, how is it going? What opinions you have on some of the topics that we've discussed here? And there'll be some more things I'll put in the show notes from everyone that's here. And thank you so much for coming, and thank you for joining us on this journey. Thank you very much. My name remains Falari.
OJ.
Share.
Seyi.
And thank you very much. Have a good day. Cheers. Peace.